All right, so we have reached the end of our first semester, so halfway through the year, and we didn't have a final for the first semester, but we do have an assignment. It's called Final Day Assignment, and I'm going to ask you to click on this, and I've taken the liberty of having it ready, and looking at the big 100 of world history. Now, I'm going to hold you responsible for all 100 of these words come June, but I want us to take a day to make sure we remember what these words mean. We can provide examples and all that good stuff. So you can see the highlighted words, and if you go back to the Moodle page, there is a PowerPoint that says Big 100 PowerPoint. And in this video, I'm going to go over the first unit, and then I'll make subsequent videos for the other ones. So world history, world wall, the Big 100. And let's start off with Unit 1, what we started the year with. And the first word we learned was historical perspective. So historical perspective, it's how you perceive history, its value, its importance, its usage, and different sides of a story. Recently, there was a football game. The football game is a history. It happened. But if you ask the two sides who watched the game, they are going to bring different perspectives to it. Two sides of a political debate, a very conservative person versus a very liberal person. The history will happen, but they're going to see it differently. So it was the first thing we've learned because it doesn't go away, historical perspective. Now, the second word we learned, or term I should say, that we learned is historical scale. It's the amount of detail you bring to a historical event and how you bounce around to different levels. So, for example, if I were to ask you, how was your morning? Go, good. Not a lot of detail. If you get into great detail about what time you woke up, how you brushed your teeth, a lot of detail. Also, if you can scale, it's like, okay, what this applies here at school can also be compared to something in U.S. history or world history. So historical scale is the second term. Primary sources, the third term that you learned was the usage of original unbiased information. This is the best way to do history. It allows you to think for yourself, and it is free from bias. And it can be all of these things: photos and diaries and artifacts and poems and news footage and paintings and art. Primary sources, original. If you recall the analogy, a fist fight breaks out. What's the most objective way to view that history? It's a security camera. You can see it for yourself and think for yourself. And then we learned how to assess a claim. And this might be the most important thing to learn in class, because you will always hear claims after high school, the rest of your life. And at the first level, it's hunch, it's your feeling, it's, what you think to be true. And then you ask yourself, level 2, authority. Should I listen to this somebody? So if you ask me about math, I am not an authority. Now, if you ask me about, hey, tell me about World War I, I'm probably an authority on that. So ask yourself, should I listen to this person? 3, logic. Does it make logical sense? Do all the pieces fit? Do you see the pattern? But most importantly, what you should seek out is evidence. Evidence to back claims. And then we learned about the archaeology. Now, in terms of our very old story, archaeology tells that story. And there are 6 steps that archaeologists take to unearth, no pun intended, past history to help us piece together a story. They locate a site, then they map it out, they excavate or dig the area, they screen the material to try to get the stuff they're looking for versus the debris. They document everything, they bring it into a lab. It's how we know the oldest part of our human story. And then we learn about race. Now, in terms of race, race is a sociological construct, meaning, we are all Homo sapiens, and when we look at our story leaving Eastern Africa 180,000 years ago, we come from the same well. So biologically, race is not a construct. It is sociological, if you recall that. And then we learned some terms that we've already seen time and time again. Ways people rule themselves, for instance. Kingdom. It's a country, state, or territory ruled by a king or a queen. And we've learned about a lot of kingdoms. In fact, we are in the age of exploration, and we just learned about Columbus, for instance, and he sailed for King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the Kingdom of Spain. And then we learned about civilization, from that story of hunting and gathering man into Agrarian Man, and then to civilization, which happened along the Tigris-Euphrates River in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. And this criterion that we've been using, and there's others, this is the one I use, you need to have these 7 items. Cities. Cities are the engines of civilization. Advanced tools, specialized jobs that result in different social classes, which we see today: rich, middle class, poor, writing, organized religion or advanced religion, and government and laws. This constitutes civilization. Empire. Empire is a growth by conquest. And we've learned about a lot of empires: the Persian Empire, the Empire of Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire. You conquer and expand. And it was the method of governing of choice by a lot of people that we've already learned about. We've also hopefully learned about historical bias, that we all have historical bias. And I acknowledged my bias when talking about, for example, a story of the auto industry. My family works for Ford Motor Company. I have a bias. When we learned about the Greeks versus the Persians, the book had 40 pages of Greece and a page and a half of Persia. Now, if that textbook was in Iran, it would probably be quite different. So people have biases, historians have biases, textbooks have biases. Be able to identify them, and they're everywhere. They're not going away. And then we learned an idea called a city-state. Now, a city-state is a city that runs itself like an autonomous government. And probably the best example is Greece. Greece had over 1,000 very different. Athens was a democracy. Sparta was a military dictatorship. And the Greeks experimented with many different types of government. It was a laboratory for government. City-states aren't very common in modern times. Singapore, Hong Kong, you can argue city-states. But city-states, the Mayans had city-states. It was a method of governing primarily associated with ancient times. Hegemony. Who's got dominance? Who's got power? Who is running the show? And hegemony shifts. Hegemony over time, we looked at China's 5,000 years. At some points in Chinese history, very strong. Lots of hegemony. Then they get weakened. Less hegemony. And it changes. Hegemony is a fancy word for dominance, power. Cultural diffusion. You're probably sick of me saying these two words because it is everywhere, especially in the era of hemispheric interactions when people were mixing. Lots of different things happen. And the more people you mix with, the more you learn. And you see this. You combine two types of food, you get this fusion food, something new. You combine music, you combine ideas, and the world, as it mixes more, advances more. And there's a reason for that, because the more people you mix with, the more you learn. It's kind of a general rule of life, yet alone history. Then we've learned about some diasporas. Now, diasporas are when a group of people get removed from their homeland, and they keep their culture wherever they go. And we've learned about some diasporas the Jewish people went through when they lost the Holy Land. Africans being taken from West Africa to the Americas. You were removed from a homeland, but you maintain your culture. If you do that, that's related to diaspora. Hopefully we've learned about push versus pull migrations. People have been on the move forever. When you graduate high school, a lot of you are going to hit the road one way or the other. Now, push factors are very negative reasons, not happy reasons you leave. It could be famine, it could be oppression, it could be you get kicked out for whatever odd reason. Pull are things that are positive. Hey, we're going to give you a lot of money, you're going to make a better life, you've fallen in love. Whatever the case may be, push are negative factors, pull are positive factors. Historiography. Historiography is when you ask yourself the source. Does it come from a good source or a bad source? And this is essential, especially in this era of fake news, can I trust this? And I look at social media, I look at Instagram, I look at Facebook. Some people post absurd things, and I look at the source, and they're from these wackadoodle sites. Now, if it says .edu at the end of it, it's from a university, it's vetted. If it says .gov, libraryofcongress.gov, I can trust that. If it's an unknown weird site that has an unknown weird thing, it's probably not true. So the best sites are reputable sites, and being able to identify reputable versus disreputable is called historiography. Syncretism. Syncretism is a term that we see when religious ideas combine. Now, the most obvious example is China and the vinegar tasters, if you recall, that you have Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, blending into a system of Chinese belief. So, for example, when we were learning about the world religions, some people said, hey, I really like that Buddhist idea, but I profess to be a Christian. Is that okay? It's a personal decision, but if you take a Buddhist idea as a practicing Christian, that's syncretism, the blending of religious ideas. Cognitive dissonance. Now, when you study history, a lot of times you learn things in class, or you're told something by others, but it doesn't match your observation. It's that feeling you get when you're experiencing one. What you have been taught doesn't match the evidence and what you see. And if you are open-minded and if you are open to evidence, you will experience this, because whomever has taught you in the past is not necessarily right. They might have misinformation, they might have heavy bias, they might flat out be liars. But once you get the evidence and you go through that, it's called cognitive dissonance. Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is this idea that my people are better than your people. We're seeing it right now in the era of European exploration, where these European nations engage in some practices like coerced labor, slavery, mercantilism, imperialism, because they felt they were better. That's a form of ethnocentrism. And hunting and gathering, it was the first type of man. It went on for a very long time. As human beings left East Africa 180,000 years ago, we were hunting and gathering. It was very sustainable. You'd work about 2,000 calories a day to earn about 2,000 calories to take in. Simple, you probably only worked about 4 hours a day. And because it worked so well, it went on to the time of Agrarian Man, which happened when hunting and gathering man filled up the world. They reached southern Argentina, and the world was filled, and people stayed sedentary. They stayed in one place. And if you can think about a modern farm, you plant crops and then you grow, and you have animals. And agrarian was the time period between hunting and gathering and civilized man that we learned prior. And reiteration of an earlier point, cities. Cities are the engines of civilization. Cities were the things that once they were established, we shift from agrarian societies into civilized society. And those first civilizations became known as the River Valley civilizations, with Mesopotamia along the Fertile Crescent of the Tigris-Euphrates, Egypt along the Nile, the Indus Valley people along the Indus River, and ancient China along the Yellow River. And these possessed the 7 criterions for civilization. And then we learned about religion. Now, religion and history, are intermeshed throughout our story. It's an essential part of our story. And we learned about 5. Now, there are 3 Abrahamic Western religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They're monotheistic. There is one God. They stem from Abraham, have some commonalities. Then the main Eastern ones, Hinduism and Buddhism. And there's an argument that you include Shinto and Taoism and whatnot. But for our sake, we have 5 world religions. They answer the fundamental questions all people ask. They adapt to the cultures where they spread. The political leadership adopts it, like the Edict of Milan in Rome, for instance, with Christianity. And they're portable. It's a message that transcends geography. And they answer these questions: the cosmological, where we fit into the cosmos; mystical, it provides a deep, profound experience; pedagogical, what you were taught; and sociological, gives you a group of people that you can affiliate with. And then the term turning point. Now, a turning point is a big moment that whatever happens, everything changes. And those are the big moments. Those are the big turning points. Columbus arriving in 1492 was a turning point. Okay, Rome shifting from a republic to an empire was a turning point, and whatnot. Okay, so that ends Unit 1. And I hope you understand what I just said, and you can think of examples. And I will make a second video explaining Unit 2. Thanks for watching.